The jasmine flowers were pressed so firmly into the ivory frosting that they looked like they had been there forever. A delicate, fragrant anchor for a woman who spent her entire life valuing authenticity over appearances. 70 candles flickered in the dimly lit, mahogany-paneled private room of the Gilded Oak in Harborview, Massachusetts. It was a crisp, biting Thursday in November. Outside, the Atlantic churned against the jagged, unforgiving cliffs with a relentless rhythm. But inside, the room was thick with the scent of expensive French perfume, aged vintage wine, and a palpable performative affection that made my skin crawl. 50 guests, a carefully curated tapestry of my life's history, ranging from distant cousins to longtime professional colleagues, sat watching with polite, expectant smiles as my daughter-in-law, Chloe, rose from her chair at exactly 7:11 p.m. She tapped her crystal champagne flute with a manicured fingernail, the sharp, clear sound cutting through the dinner chatter like a surgical blade. Her smile was practiced, the kind of expression one wears when they have already calculated the dividends of a long-term investment. "Frances has lived a life of such remarkable grace," Chloe announced to the hushed room, her voice projecting with the practiced modulation of a high-level public speaker. She spoke for 4 minutes, weaving a masterful, suffocating narrative of my supposed decline, my increasing forgetfulness, and the difficult, necessary decisions the family had reached in my best interest. She spoke of the Horizon Haven, a facility with marble floors and state-of-the-art memory care units. "We want Grandma to be safe," she concluded, her eyes scanning the room for approval, her voice thick with synthetic empathy. "So tomorrow, she begins her new chapter at Horizon Haven. It's all arranged." I sat perfectly still, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I did not reach for my wine. I did not look at my son, David. I am Frances Finley, and if you have ever been quietly erased by a person who smiled while holding the eraser, I want you to listen closely. This isn't a plea for sympathy. It is a masterclass in evidence, a chronicle of how I dismantled a carefully constructed trap. I have spent 32 years as a high-end gemologist and estate appraiser in the Northeast. I have authenticated the provenance of rare Victorian mourning jewelry and unmasked multi-million-dollar forgeries of Tiffany glass. I have testified in 14 federal fraud cases, standing before judges and juries to declare the difference between the genuine and the fraudulent. I understand the weight of evidence. I understand that a signature is not just ink on a page. It is a declaration of truth or a gateway to a lie. When my husband Arthur passed away 13 years ago from a sudden aggressive illness, I didn't crumble under the weight of grief. I secured my life. I managed my assets. I kept my own counsel, building a fortress of financial and personal independence. But Chloe? Chloe didn't know that. She saw a widow living in a quiet, sprawling colonial home and assumed I was a relic waiting to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. She looked at me and saw an ending. She didn't realize she was dealing with a professional who specialized in detecting fakes. For 18 months, I had been meticulously documenting her. Every comment she made to the neighbors about my confusion, every concern she voiced to my son about my ability to manage the house, I kept a time-stamped, detailed log of every incident. Chloe was a hospital administrator who excelled at managing systems, but she made the fatal error of assuming that because I was 70, I was obsolete. She wanted the estate, my property in Harborview, valued at over $1 million, and my carefully diversified investment portfolio were the targets. She had spent months bending David's perception of me, dropping seeds of doubt that took root in his mind until they became an orchard of false beliefs. He didn't see the manipulation because he trusted his wife the way a patient trusts a surgeon, completely and without a second thought. He was a brilliant cardiologist, a man who saved lives, but he had outsourced his family conscience to Chloe. He didn't know he was being managed. He thought he was being cared for. I knew the blow was coming. 3 months prior, I had found a forged letter in Chloe's designer tote bag, a medical evaluation she had typed herself, mimicking the signature of my GP, Dr. Sterling. It recommended immediate placement in a memory care facility, citing progressive cognitive impairment. She hadn't accounted for the fact that I knew exactly how Dr. Sterling signed his name, the slight left-hand curve of the S, the specific hurried pressure of the ink on the paper. Hers was close, but it lacked the history of a real hand. It was the slightly wrong detail that gave it away. The most dangerous thing I have ever encountered in my career. A professional forger would have known better. But Chloe was just an administrator who thought she was smarter than the system. I had documented the forgery, consulted a sharp elder law attorney, and completed a full state-certified neuropsychological evaluation with Dr. Miriam Vance, a renowned geriatric psychiatrist. Her report was conclusive. My cognitive function was in the 97th percentile for my age. In the weeks leading up to that fateful Thursday, the air in my home had felt charged, as if a storm were brewing just beneath the floorboards. Chloe became increasingly efficient, a whirlwind of helpful gestures that felt more like a closing net. She would come over on Sunday afternoons, ostensibly to help me organize my kitchen cabinets, but her real intent was to map out my life. She would open my drawers, her eyes scanning for financial statements, passbooks, or anything that hinted at the structure of my estate. She didn't know that I had already moved my most important documents to a secure, off-site safety deposit box that only my attorney and I could access. She was playing a game of chess while I was operating in the realm of high-stakes legal forensics. Every interaction was a dance, a delicate balance of feigning the confused, fragile elderly woman she expected me to be, while all the while recording her psychological encroachment with the precision of a scientist. I recall a specific Tuesday 2 weeks before the party. Chloe brought over a new medication organizer, a brightly colored plastic contraption that she insisted I use. "It's so easy, Grandma," she said, her voice dripping with that saccharine, condescending concern that she reserved for me. "You just pop the pills into the little slots, and you won't have to worry about whether you took your dose." I thanked her, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing, and watched her as she stood in my kitchen, her eyes wandering toward my desk. She was waiting for a slip-up, a moment of visible frustration or incompetence that she could report back to David. I didn't give it to her. Instead, I carefully placed my current medication into the new organizer, all the while noting the specific time she arrived and left, the way she surreptitiously glanced at my mail, and the precise words she used to reinforce the narrative of my decline. It was in these quiet moments that the reality of the situation became clear. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. Chloe was erasing the woman I had been, the professional, the mother, the wife, and replacing her with a ghost, a shell that she could easily manipulate and eventually institutionalize. But she didn't understand the depth of the legacy I had built. She looked at my life and saw only the surface, failing to realize that every object in my home, every document in my files carried a history. I had spent my life unmasking fakes, uncovering the truth behind ornate lies, and now I was being forced to apply that same skill set to my own family. It was a bitter realization, but one that strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just protecting my house or my accounts. I was protecting the truth of my existence. Before we dive deeper into the next stage of this unfolding drama, let me take a moment to reflect on why this channel, Historias que Impactan, is so vital. We aren't just here to share stories. We are here to explore the complexities of human nature, the subtle betrayals that can happen behind closed doors, and the immense power of resilience. When I share these narratives, I am inviting you into a space where your own experiences, your own challenges, and your own victories have a place. There is a profound strength in storytelling, in naming the things that are often kept hidden, and your subscription is what allows this community to continue that work. Every time you hit that button, you are saying that these stories and the people behind them matter. Thank you for being a part of this, for listening, and for valuing the truth in a world that often prefers the convenience of a lie. Back to the planning. My meetings with Warren Gould, the elder law specialist, were the lifeline I had been searching for. Warren was a man of few words, but his mind was a sharp, clinical instrument. We met in his office in downtown Hartford, a place that felt far removed from the cozy, deceptive atmosphere of my kitchen. I laid out the timeline I had constructed, 18 months of Chloe's behavior documented with cold, hard facts. He went through it page by page, his pen scratching against the paper, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he finally looked up, his gaze was steady. "Mrs. Finley," he said, "you've done the work of a dozen investigators. This isn't just about what she said. It's about the cumulative impact of her actions. This is a clear, documented pattern of elder abuse." He then explained the leverage we needed, the psychiatric evaluation, The evaluation with Dr. Miriam Vance was perhaps the most intense experience of my professional life. It wasn't just a clinical assessment. It was a verification of my own self. She sat in her office at Yukon Health, her desk uncluttered, her eyes focused entirely on me. She didn't treat me like a patient. She treated me like a person who deserved clarity. She led me through a series of tests, cognitive, memory, reasoning, that I had once used to assess others in my professional capacity. It was an odd, almost surreal sensation to be on the other side of the desk, but I found comfort in the process. When she finally looked at her notes and told me I was in the 97th percentile, it wasn't just a result, it was a shield. I knew then that I was bulletproof, and the rest was just a matter of execution. The days leading up to my 70th birthday were a study in contrast. On the surface, I was the frail, slightly forgetful grandmother Chloe was painting for the world. I moved a little slower in the grocery store. I asked the same question twice to the neighbor at the mailbox, and I let Chloe handle the heavy lifting of the party arrangements. Every small act was a performance, a deliberate sowing of seeds that I knew would grow into the exact narrative she needed to feel invincible. She was so blinded by her own arrogance, so enamored with the brilliance of her plan, that she never once looked beneath the surface of my cooperation. She saw a woman surrendering. I saw a woman preparing the perimeter of a cage she was building for herself. I spent hours in my kitchen office, surrounded by the ghosts of my professional life. The files, the photographs, the meticulous records of 1,000 authenticated lives. I felt the weight of my history, the strength that comes from a lifetime of being precise. My husband, Arthur, had been a man who loved structure, and he would have been proud of the way I had organized this final act. He would have recognized the meticulous nature of the evidence, the way I had cross-referenced the dates, the witnesses, and the forged documents. There is a deep, quiet satisfaction in knowing exactly where you stand, especially when everyone around you is operating on a faulty premise. One evening, while David was over for dinner, the tension in the room was like a physical weight. Chloe was talking about the logistics of the move to Horizon Haven, her voice light and airy, as if she were discussing a vacation package rather than the systematic removal of a human being from her own life. David sat there, nodding along, his eyes devoid of the critical thinking I knew he was capable of. It was heartbreaking, but it was also necessary. I watched him and reminded myself that this was not about blame, but about the specific dangerous power of a false narrative left unchallenged for too long. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I simply ate my dinner and listened, committing every word, every patronizing tone to my mental ledger. I often thought about the women I had met during my career, the ones who had lost their voice because they let others speak for them. I thought about the families destroyed by secrets and the empires of lies that collapsed the moment someone brought a light into the room. This story, Historias K. Impactin, is a testament to the fact that you are never truly erased unless you allow yourself to be. Every time you listen to these narratives, I want you to remember that your story belongs to you, and your agency is the one thing that can never be legally or socially revoked as long as you have the truth on your side. Your support, your subscription, and your engagement here are not just helping a channel. They are validating the reality that every individual's voice, especially those who are seasoned by time and experience, carries an immovable weight. Chloe had arranged everything. She had even picked out the cake, the flowers, and the guest list, ensuring that every person in that room was someone who would be susceptible to the concerned daughter-in-law's narrative. She had effectively created a vacuum where only her truth could exist. But she forgot one thing. She wasn't just building a narrative. She was building a public record. The restaurant, the witnesses, the speeches, everything she used to ensure my silence would become the very stage upon which her exposure would play out. She wanted the drama of a public transition. She would get exactly the kind of drama that she hadn't accounted for. I began to prepare for the final act. I selected the gray wool dress, the one that had witnessed more truth in courtrooms than most people see in a lifetime. I polished the pearls, the genuine Akoya I had authenticated decades ago, and I held the jasmine perfume, the scent of evidence, in my hands. It wasn't just a perfume. It was a sensory anchor, a reminder of the thousands of hours I had spent in depositions, in front of judges, in the middle of storms that others had created. I was ready. The trap was set, not for me, but for the one who thought she was the architect of my life. The birthday was not just a celebration of 70 years. It was the date of the audit, the day the books would be balanced, and the truth would finally, unequivocally, be declared. As the morning of my 70th birthday arrived, the air in the house was deceptively still. I moved through the rooms of my home with a calm purpose, touching the surfaces of the mahogany tables and the spines of the books in my office. Each item was a silent witness to a life lived with integrity. I didn't feel the nervousness of a 70-year-old woman facing an uncertain future. I felt the cold, collected focus of a seasoned expert witness arriving at a courthouse. The house was silent, but in my mind, the machinery of my plan was clicking into place with mechanical perfection. I had spent the last several weeks ensuring that every legal document was signed, every piece of evidence was indexed, and that Warren Gould was ready to act the moment the phone call was made. I spent a significant portion of the morning reviewing my files one last time. There is a particular clarity that comes when you hold the physical proof of someone else's duplicity in your hands. It strips away the fear of the unknown. Chloe was a creature of systems, but she had failed to realize that every system has a vulnerability. The moment it encounters intruth it cannot process. She had built her entire argument on the assumption that I was a broken system, a piece of hardware that was failing and needed to be replaced. She didn't realize that I had been the one maintaining the architecture of the family's stability for decades, and that I knew exactly where the foundation was cracked.
Linda, my dearest friend and former principal, arrived early that afternoon to help me prepare. She didn't ask questions. She knew me better than anyone. She saw the set of my jaw, the sharp, unwavering focus in my eyes, and she understood that this was not a birthday celebration. It was a confrontation. As we stood in my bedroom, she helped me fasten the clasp of my pearls. "You look like you're going into battle, Francis," she remarked, her voice quiet. I smiled, a small, tight movement of the lips. "It's not a battle, Linda. It's an authentication. I'm simply verifying the value of what is real and what is not." The drive to the restaurant was a quiet passage through the familiar, rolling landscape of Millbrook. I looked out the window at the familiar storefronts and the trees that were shedding their autumn leaves, thinking about how easily we deceive ourselves into believing that our reality is the only one that exists. Chloe lived in a reality of her own making, one where she was the hero, the savior, the efficient daughter-in-law managing the decline of an elderly woman. She didn't know that she was the one whose reality was about to shatter. She had spent 18 months planting seeds of doubt, but she hadn't realized that I was observing the soil, the growth, and the harvest every step of the way. It is during times like these that I find myself grateful for the community we are building at. Karma Tales storytelling is the most ancient form of truth-telling. By sharing these experiences, we aren't just entertaining, we are creating a record of the human experience in all its complexity. Your presence here, your commitment to following these narratives to their conclusion, is a testament to your own value for truth. This channel is not just a collection of stories, it is a collaborative effort to ensure that the quiet voices, the ones that are often dismissed or overlooked, are given the platform they deserve. Your subscription is the foundation of this effort, and as we navigate the complexities of this particular story, I am honored that you are here to see it through to the end. When we arrived at the Gilded Oak, the parking lot was filling up with the cars of family members and neighbors. I saw Chloe's sleek, modern SUV parked prominently near the entrance, a symbol of the life she thought she was securing for herself. She was inside, no doubt finalizing the seating arrangements, checking the menus, and ensuring that every detail of the evening was perfectly aligned with the narrative she had constructed. She was the conductor of the orchestra, unaware that I had rewritten the score, and that the music was about to take a turn she wouldn't be able to ignore. I stepped out of the car, smoothed my dress, and inhaled the crisp November air. I was not afraid. I was simply ready for the final piece of evidence to be presented. As I walked into the private room, the hum of conversation was vibrant, almost celebratory. People turned to look as I entered, their expressions a mix of genuine affection and, in some cases, the pity that Chloe had so carefully cultivated. I navigated the room with the same grace I had always possessed, smiling, nodding, and accepting the well wishes of those who didn't know they were standing in the middle of a trap. I found my seat at the head table, the place Chloe had designated for me. It was a position of honor, she had said, but in reality, it was a display case. Little did she know, she was about to be the one on display, and the world was about to see exactly who she was beneath that warm, practiced smile. The dinner began with a precision that was almost jarring. The service was impeccable, the wine list curated to perfection, and the ambience designed to lull everyone into a state of comfortable, unquestioning complacency. Chloe moved through the room with the ease of a veteran politician, her champagne flute never empty, her laughter perfectly timed. I watched her from my seat, not with anger, but with the detached, clinical observation that had defined my 3 decades as an appraiser. I noticed the way she leaned into Tom's shoulder, the way she touched his arm, a tactile reinforcement of their alliance. It was a masterclass in social manipulation, yet I felt a strange sense of pity. She had invested so much energy into building a house of cards that she had become incapable of seeing the breeze that was already beginning to stir. Throughout the meal, I played my part. I spoke of the weather, of the garden that Arthur and I had planted, of the memories of the neighborhood that had shifted so drastically over the years. I saw the relief in the eyes of some of the older guests, who were perhaps nervous about how I would hold up during the celebration. Chloe, ever the vigilant manager, would glance in my direction frequently, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. She thought I was finally playing along, finally accepting the role of the frail, elderly woman who needed to be guided and protected. She didn't know that every forgetful pause was a strategic silence, every smile a mask, and every polite nod a silent affirmation that the evidence was already in motion. As the main course was cleared away and the whispers of dessert began to drift through the room, the atmosphere grew heavy with the unspoken expectation of the evening's main event. This was the moment Chloe had been rehearsing for months. She stood up, smoothing the front of her tailored silk dress, and the room naturally quieted. It was a Pavlovian response she had cultivated with surgical precision. She stood at the head of the table, the light catching the diamond pendant around her neck, a piece I had once appraised and advised against because of its murky origin. The irony was not lost on me. "I'd like to say a few words," she began, her voice ringing out with the authority of someone who owns the narrative. She spoke about love, about family, and about the difficult, bittersweet transition that lay ahead. She painted a picture of herself as the self-sacrificing daughter-in-law, a saint of patience who had spent the last 18 months navigating the turbulent waters of my aging process. She spun a story that was so well-crafted, so rich with plausible concern, that I saw even Linda, my oldest, dearest friend, start to look down at her plate, perhaps wondering if she had missed the signs of my decline. Chloe was good. She was dangerous because she was believable. But then I heard it. A small, almost imperceptible catch in her voice when she mentioned the medical necessity of the memory care facility. It was the only crack in her armor, the flicker of greed, of anticipation for the moment the papers were finally signed and the estate became hers to manage. That small vibration in her tone confirmed everything I had known. It wasn't about safety, it was about the asset. It was about the house, the accounts, and the final dissolution of my agency. She wasn't just moving a woman, she was liquidating an obstacle. I felt the weight of the manila envelope in my large, structured handbag, the one I had kept tucked under my chair like a grenade. I had spent 32 years studying the difference between a genuine article and a sophisticated reproduction. I had seen people lose their fortunes, their reputations, and their freedom because they couldn't distinguish between the two. Now, sitting in the heart of the home she thought she had conquered, I realized that Chloe was the most convincing fake I had ever encountered. She was a flawless replica of a loving family member, but the moment I placed her next to the truth, the seams were going to tear open. It is during these moments of clarity that I am reminded of the mission we share here on Karma Tales. We delve into these stories not just for the thrill of the climax, but to understand the patterns that govern our lives. We are all, in some capacity, curators of our own reality. The choice to dig for the truth, to demand the evidence rather than accept the narrative, is the most empowering act a person can undertake. Your decision to remain with me through this long, intricate account is a testament to your own commitment to the truth. You are not just a viewer, you are a witness. And as I watched Chloe basking in the silence she had commanded, I knew that the testimony was about to begin. I waited until she reached the very end of her speech, the point where she was about to make the final arrangement public. She was beaming, a performance of such chilling confidence that it almost deserved an audience. But she wouldn't get it. Not anymore. I leaned forward in my seat, the leather of my handbag yielding to my touch. The room was waiting for the grand announcement, the final seal on my future. But before the word could leave her lips, I was going to provide a different kind of ending. The silence following Chloe's final, lingering sentence, "It's all arranged," felt like a physical shroud draped over the room. She was looking at Tom, expecting him to be the one to toast to the new beginning. She was waiting for the validation of the room, the collective nod of approval that would cement her success. I saw Tom glance at me, his expression softening into a mixture of pity and relief. He truly believed his wife was an angel of mercy. He truly believed he was doing the right thing. It was a beautiful, devastating illusion, and I felt the cold, hard weight of the evidence beneath my hand. I rose slowly. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. There is a specific cadence to a person who knows exactly what they are doing, and I adopted it. I stood up, adjusting the collar of my wool dress, and took a single step toward the center of the room. The transition from the frail woman to the expert witness was immediate. I saw Chloe's smile waver, just for a fraction of a second. She wasn't used to me interrupting her rhythm. She wasn't used to me moving with anything other than the hesitation she had curated for me. "Chloe," I said, my voice cutting through the stillness, steady and resonant, lacking any of the tremor she had been so careful to emphasize in her own stories. That was a remarkably well-managed presentation. The logistics alone must have taken quite some time to prepare. It's fascinating how much effort goes into creating a reality that doesn't actually exist. The room seemed to inhale. Chloe's face turned a shade of pale that I hadn't seen before. "Francis, please," she said, her voice dropping into that familiar, condescending register she used to manage me. "You're tired. You're confused. Let's not do this in front of everyone." "I am neither tired nor confused, Chloe," I replied, my tone clinical. "In fact, for the first time in 18 months, I have never been clearer. You see, I spent 32 years authenticating jewelry, glass, and estate documents. I have seen the most sophisticated forgeries in the world. I have spent my life learning how to spot the slight, rounded edge of a curve, the deviation of an ink line, the subtle drift of a baseline that suggests a hand that is trying to mimic something it does not understand." I pulled the manila envelope from my bag and laid it on the pristine white tablecloth. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "You are an efficient administrator, Chloe. You understand systems perfectly. But you made a fundamental error. You tried to forge a life, and you forgot that a forge is only as good as the expert who inspects it." I saw Tom move, his brows drawing together in that familiar, protective way. "Mom? What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Dr. Sterling, Tom," I said, my eyes locking onto his. "I'm talking about the medical evaluation that Chloe prepared on her own time, the one where she took the liberty of practicing his signature until she thought it looked enough like the real thing to satisfy a nursing home's administrative requirement." As I spoke, I watched the faces in the room. Linda, my friend, was standing now, her eyes wide, realization dawning on her features. She knew my work. She knew that when I said something was a forgery, I could hold it up in a federal court and have it accepted as fact. The pity in the room began to shift into curiosity, then into a collective, uncomfortable tension. Chloe was backed into a corner, but she was still trying to claw her way out. "This is ridiculous," Chloe hissed, her composure finally beginning to shred. "She's not well, Tom. Look at her. She's making things up. She's suffering from delusions." "Delusions are a diagnostic category, Chloe," I countered, the voice of the expert witness taking full control. "I have the results of a neuropsychological evaluation from Dr. Miriam Vance at UConn Health. She is a state-certified geriatric psychiatrist. She performed a comprehensive assessment of my cognitive function. The results place me in the 97th percentile for my age group. I have no evidence of dementia, no impairment, and certainly no reason to be institutionalized. The only delusion in this room is the one you've been feeding this family for a year and a half. The weight of this information hit the table like a lead weight. I could see the guests looking at each other, the whispers starting to ripple outward. The concerned daughter-in-law narrative was collapsing, and in its place was the reality of a woman who had been systematically targeted by a predator who thought she was too old to fight back. This, my friends, is the power of documentation. This is why we tell these stories on Karma Tales. We don't just share these experiences to point fingers. We share them to highlight the necessity of maintaining our own truth, our own records, and our own agency. When you subscribe to this channel, you're aligning yourself with the truth, and you are ensuring that these lessons reach others who might need to hear them. Your engagement, your comments, and your support allow us to keep building this platform where the truth is not just a concept, but a practice. I didn't stop there. I reached into the envelope and pulled out the side-by-side photographs I had taken on my kitchen counter. Here, I said, gesturing to the images. The genuine signature of Dr. Sterling, compared with the one Chloe so helpfully created for my medical file. Note the loop in the capital R. Notice the pressure. A professional would have seen it instantly. I saw it because I've looked at signatures my entire professional life. Chloe was silent now. The mask was off. The charming, efficient, perfect daughter-in-law was gone, replaced by a woman who had been caught in the middle of a crime. Tom was staring at the photos, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. He was a man of science. He understood evidence. And as he looked at the proof of his wife's deception, the blindfold he had worn for 18 months finally slipped away. The silence in the dining room had become heavy, almost solid. It was the kind of silence that occurs when a long-standing lie is suddenly stripped of its pretense, leaving the truth exposed in all its raw, jagged edges. Tom was still holding the photographs, his fingers trembling slightly. He looked at the forged signature, then back at his wife, then at me. The betrayal he felt wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about the fundamental erosion of the reality he had lived in for the better part of 2 years. He had trusted Chloe with his conscience, his family, and his peace of mind, and she had spent that trust like it was counterfeit currency. Chloe, seeing the shift in the room, tried one last, desperate maneuver. She straightened her posture, let out a sharp, dismissive laugh, and turned to the crowd, her voice regaining a fraction of its former sharpness. "Are we really doing this? Right here, in front of everyone? Francis, I know you think you're being clever, but this is clearly a projection of your own cognitive struggles. You've curated a narrative, and you're forcing people to believe it. It's exactly what the doctors warned us about, the paranoia, the fixation on details that aren't there." She was trying to flip the script, to cast me as the unstable one last time. But she had underestimated the power of documented, verifiable reality. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I simply opened the second half of the manila folder. "Tom," I said, my voice cutting through her theatrics, "there is a formal complaint being filed with the district attorney's office. It includes the fraudulent document, a sworn affidavit from Dr. Sterling confirming he never signed that letter, and a timeline of every conversation you and I had over the last 18 months, where Chloe purposefully omitted, distorted, or invented facts to lead you to believe I was losing my mind." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since I had stood up. "You made a mistake, Chloe. You treated this as a management problem, a system to be optimized. You thought you could treat a human life as an asset to be liquidated. But you weren't dealing with a broken system. You were dealing with a woman who spent her life verifying the difference between the authentic and the imitation. You never had a chance because the foundation of your plan was a lie, and lies, no matter how efficiently they are managed, eventually lose their structural integrity." The guests were starting to stir. Some were standing up, grabbing their coats, their faces flushed with the discomfort of having witnessed a private dismantling. Linda stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm, a silent, powerful gesture of support that told me exactly where the room stood. Chloe's face was a mask of pure fury now, The veneer of the charming administrator completely gone. She turned to Tom, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "Tell them, Tom. Tell them how she's been acting. Tell them about the house, the forgetfulness, the incidents." But Tom didn't answer her. He was still looking at the papers. He was a physician. He knew how to read clinical data. And the data in his hands didn't lie. He looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the look of a man who is seeing someone clearly for the first time. The trust was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged realization. He didn't say a word to her. He simply set the folder down on the table, picked up his drink, and walked toward the exit of the private room. He didn't walk out because he was confused or manipulated. He walked out because he needed to be somewhere where the air didn't smell like a lie. Chloe, realizing she had lost her champion, looked around the room, hoping for some flicker of support. She found none. She was alone. The guests who had come to celebrate a birthday were now witnesses to a public unraveling. I walked over to the table where my cake sat, the jasmine flowers still perfectly pressed into the frosting. I took a small plate, picked up a fork, and sat down. The celebration wasn't over, but it had changed. It was no longer a celebration of my decline and transition, it was a celebration of the truth. As I sat there, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. This, my friends, is what Historias K Impactan stands for. It isn't just about the stories that make us feel good. It is about the stories that force us to look at the world and the people in it with the courage of a witness. Every one of you who has subscribed has made it possible for us to continue this exploration of the human condition. When you value the truth, when you demand that the people in your life be who they claim to be, you are reclaiming your own power. Your support, your subscription, and the time you spend listening to these narratives are the pillars of this community. Thank you for being a part of this journey and for standing with me as we see this through. Chloe didn't wait for the inevitable. She grabbed her bag from the chair, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, and fled the room. I watched her go, a silhouette of greed and desperation disappearing into the cold November night. The door swung shut behind her, the sound echoing in the stillness of the room. It was over. The house, the money, the life I had worked for, all were safe. But more importantly, the reality of who I was, the woman who unmasks fakes for a living, had been verified, authenticated, and restored. The days following that Thursday were not quiet. They were, in fact, loud with the debris of a life being dismantled. The legal machinery I had set in motion began to turn with a relentless, grinding efficiency. My attorney, Claire Harmon, and the elder law specialist, Warren Gould, moved through the wreckage of Chloe's plans like a tactical team. There was no room for maneuver, no space for the kind of subtle, gaslighting manipulation that had defined our interactions for the past 18 months. When you are armed with a state-certified psychiatric evaluation, a mountain of time-stamped evidence, and a clear pattern of attempted fraud, the law is not a suggestion, it is a wall. I spent most of those days in my home office, the alcove that Arthur and I had built in our early years in Millbrook. It had always been a place of quiet focus, but now it felt like a sanctuary. I organized the final files, the ones that documented the unraveling of Chloe's ambition. It was a strange task to document the end of a relationship, but it was necessary. I wanted to ensure that if anyone ever looked back at this time, if David ever needed to understand exactly how the fracture occurred, the evidence would be there, clean, ordered, and undeniable. David came to see me on a Tuesday, nearly a week after the party. He looked older, the stress of the last few days etching new lines around his eyes. He didn't say much at first. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had once found the forged letter in Chloe's tote bag, and we drank tea in a silence that felt different than before. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the last 18 months. It was a fragile, searching one. "I didn't see it, Mom," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how I didn't see it. I'm a doctor. I look at charts all day. I analyze symptoms. How did I miss the symptoms of what was happening right in front of me?" I looked at my son, a man I had raised to be compassionate and capable, and I felt a surge of empathy that had nothing to do with the betrayal. You didn't miss them because you were incapable, David, I told him gently. You missed them because you trusted. You outsourced your attention because you believed you were protecting the people you loved. That's not a failure of intelligence. It's a failure of vigilance. We all do it. We all decide to trust someone so completely that we stop auditing them. The tragedy isn't that you trusted her. The tragedy is that she made trust a weapon. We talked for hours. We talked about his childhood, about the lighthouse in Maine I had mentioned at the party, and about the way the last 2 years had created a distance between us that I hadn't realized was so deep. It wasn't a total reconciliation. That would take time and a lot more work, but it was a start. He was finally seeing me again, not as a woman who was slipping or declining, but as the mother he had always known, someone sharp, someone resilient, someone who knew how to guard the truth. This, my friends, is why we commit ourselves to the work we do on Karma Tales. We don't just tell stories to expose the villains. We tell them to honor the ones who stay, the ones who rebuild, and the ones who have the courage to demand the truth of their own lives. Your subscription to this channel is more than just a click. It is an affirmation that you, too, value the integrity of the human spirit. In a world that is constantly trying to arrange our lives for us, your choice to stand with us, to engage with these narratives, and to demand authenticity is a revolutionary act. Thank you for being the community that allows us to hold this light. I also began to receive calls from people I hadn't spoken to in years, neighbors who had heard whispers, colleagues who had been concerned by Chloe's updates. I told them the truth, clearly and concisely. I didn't frame it as a scandal. I framed it as a legal matter. It was a powerful thing to own the narrative again. I wasn't the victim. I was the person who had set the record straight. I realized then that my life was not going to be defined by what Chloe had attempted to do to me. It was going to be defined by how I responded to it. I started to take up the garden again, the one Arthur had started and I had maintained in his memory. It was late November. The ground was hardening and the perennials were going dormant, but the work was grounding. I spent hours clearing the beds, pulling the spent growth, and preparing the earth for the winter. It was a metaphor, I suppose. I was clearing out the old, the dead, and the deceptive, and making space for whatever was going to grow in the spring. I wasn't just a woman waiting for her time to be up. I was a woman who was still, and would always be, deeply rooted in the soil of her own truth. The final legal papers were served to Chloe 3 weeks after the party. I didn't go. I didn't need to be there to see the look on her face when she realized that her life in Millbrook was over. She had tried to institutionalize me, and in the process, she had institutionalized her own downfall. She would have to move. She would have to find work in a place where her reputation didn't precede her, and she would have to live with the knowledge that she had been defeated by a woman she had looked down upon. I didn't wish her harm, but I did wish her the full, unfiltered consequences of her actions. As I sit here now, looking out over the cliffs of Harborview, the air is cold and the sea is gray, but the light is different. I am Francis Finley, an appraiser of objects and a guardian of the truth. I have learned that the most important thing you can ever appraise is the integrity of your own life. Everything else, the house, the accounts, the jewelry, is just stuff. The real value lies in the ability to stand in the truth, even when it is difficult, even when it is painful, and especially when someone is smiling while they try to take it from you.